The hallway smelled like antiseptic and forced calm. That particular hospital smell, the one that promises everyone is being very professional about the fact that bodies are failing nearby, had worked its way into Catherine's hair, her clothes, the soft cashmere of the wrap she'd pulled tighter around herself 3 times in the last hour without realizing she was doing it. She sat in a chair that was designed to be functional, not kind. Outside the window, London was doing what London does in January, grey-ing itself into a kind of dignified depression, the Thames somewhere beyond the rooftops holding all that cold water without complaint. She'd been watching a pigeon on the ledge across the way for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because she'd checked her phone at minute 1 and again just now, and the pigeon hadn't moved, and neither, really, had she. The clinic room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when someone has asked the staff to please keep it quiet, and the staff have complied, and now the quiet itself has a texture. William had stepped out 20 minutes ago. Just a call, he'd said, hand on the doorframe, that particular set to his jaw that meant it wasn't just a call but he wasn't going to say so. She'd nodded. She was good at nodding now. She'd gotten very, very good at it over the last several months, the practiced, reassuring nod that said I'm fine, go, I'll be here. She was always here. She picked up the paper cup of tea that a kind nurse named she'd already forgotten had brought 40 minutes ago. It was cold. She drank it anyway. Cold tea was something she could manage. It had started, as most things that unravel you do, on an ordinary morning. Not the diagnosis that had come in December, in a room with better furniture than this one and a consultant who had the practiced stillness of a man who delivered news like this regularly and had learned that his own steadiness was the most useful thing he could offer. She'd sat through that with her hands folded in her lap and her mind doing that strange splitting thing it does in moments of shock, where one half of you is present and processing and nodding at the right intervals, and the other half has quietly floated to the ceiling and is watching from up there, somewhere near the light fixture, thinking, oh, no. The unraveling had started on a Tuesday in January when George had asked her, very casually, over breakfast, whether she was going to be better by his football match on Saturday. He'd asked it the way children ask impossible things, directly, without cruelty, without understanding that the question had edges. Are you going to be better by Saturday? She'd said yes. She'd said it before she'd decided to say it. The word had come out of her like a reflex, like pulling your hand from a flame, and he'd said brilliant and gone back to his cereal, and she'd sat there with her hands wrapped around her own mug, hot, that one, properly hot, and thought about the particular violence of hope that children carry for you without knowing it. She was going to be better by Saturday. She had to be. The treatment had been going. That was the word they used. Going. Not working, that implied a certainty that no one wanted to attach themselves to yet. Going. Moving. In process. The consultant spoke to her in the careful, lateral language of people navigating a field they know has mines in it, and she had learned to listen for what they weren't saying as much as what they were. What they were saying, the protocol was producing the hoped-for responses. What they weren't saying, we will promise you Saturday. She shifted in the chair. Her back had developed an opinion about chairs like this one. She ignored it. The pigeon finally moved, flapped once, resettled 3 inches to the left, went still again. She felt an absurd kinship with it. Yes, she thought. Exactly. She heard him before the door opened. Not his voice, he wasn't speaking. But there's a thing that happens in hospitals, in corridors, when someone of a certain presence approaches. The quality of the ambient noise changes. Footsteps acquire a kind of deliberateness. There's a small, collective adjustment. She'd grown up with it. She'd spent 20 years learning to move through it, to not be flattened by the weight of rooms rearranging themselves around proximity to the crown. She'd made her peace with it, mostly, in the way you make your peace with weather. It simply is. But she hadn't expected him today. The door opened, and King Charles came in, and he was alone, no aides, no protection officers hovering at the threshold, just him, in a dark coat that he hadn't taken off, like he'd walked here and was prepared to walk back, and the look on his face was the one she almost never saw in public. Not the king's face. His father's face. Her father-in-law's face. Something that had been held very correctly in her chest for 6 weeks moved without permission. He crossed the room without ceremony. That was the thing about him that the public rarely saw when the architecture of duty fell away, when it was just family and, for walls and, the particular hush of illness, he moved like a man who would simply come because he needed to. He sat in the chair beside her, the chair William had been in, the one angled slightly toward hers, and, for a moment he didn't say anything. Neither did she. Outside, the pigeon had gone. The ledge was empty. London went on being grey. "How are you feeling?" he said finally. Not a performance of the question. The actual question. And that was the thing, wasn't it? That was always the thing with that question in this particular room, with the antiseptic smell and the cold tea and the chair designed for function not kindness. She opened her mouth. She had the nod ready. She had "fine, I'm fine, we're managing" assembled and waiting, the whole careful architecture of reassurance that she'd been constructing and maintaining for other people's sake since December, because someone had to hold things steady, and she was good at that. She had always been good at that. The word stopped. Not because she couldn't say it. Because he was looking at her with an expression that made lying to him feel like something she'd have to carry home in her body, some extra weight in her sternum, and she was already carrying enough. Her eyes filled. She hadn't planned them to. They simply did. "I'm very tired," she said. Quietly. Like a confession. Charles reached over and covered her hand with his. His hand was the hand of a man in his 70s, warm, deliberate, the kind of steady that takes decades to grow into. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She looked at the empty pigeon ledge and let herself be tired for a minute, in front of another person, without managing it. Outside, London kept its own counsel. He stayed for an hour. No one came to collect him. No aide appeared at the door with a discreet expression and a tapped watch. The world, which had an enormous and perpetual claim on him, appeared to have agreed, for 60 minutes, to wait. She didn't know, until later, what he'd moved to be there. She found out eventually, as she found most things out, not from him, not from the official channels, but from someone at the periphery who mentioned it in the kind of offhand way that reveals they don't know they're handing you something significant. He'd had a full schedule. He'd cancelled it. Not rescheduled, cancelled. And then, he'd come. But she didn't know that yet, sitting in the room with the functional chair and the cold tea and his hand over hers. What she knew was the hour itself. They talked about the children first, the way they always did when they needed to find solid ground. George's football match. She told him about the Saturday question, and something crossed Charles's face, a flicker of something soft and slightly pained, and he said, "He's so like William at that age. He wants to fix it and doesn't have the tools yet." "None of us do," she said. "No," he agreed. "No, we don't." Charlotte had been making cards. She did this, would disappear into her room with a stack of construction paper and emerge 40 minutes later with these elaborate, slightly structurally unsound creations covered in drawings of flowers and what appeared to be horses but might have been dogs, and the words "feel better" written in letters of varying confidence. Catherine had a stack of them on the table by her bed at home. She'd mentioned it once, in passing, to a friend, and her voice had done that thing where it goes very even and careful, specifically because the alternative is breaking, and the friend had known, and the subject had shifted, and they'd both been grateful. She told Charles about the cards. He laughed. "A real one, the kind that starts in the chest. She's going to run something someday," he said. "I don't know what. But something." "Everything," Catherine said. "She's going to run everything." Louis was the one she didn't bring up, and neither did he, and the not bringing up was its own conversation. Because Louis, 5 years old, the youngest, all velocity and chaos and the absolute conviction that the world was a place designed for his entertainment, Louis had started sleeping in the hallway outside her bedroom door. Not inside the room. The hallway. With a pillow he'd dragged from his bed and a stuffed rabbit she'd thought he'd outgrown. William had tried, gently, twice, to move him back. Louis had returned. The third time, William had put a blanket over him instead. She'd started waking up in the night and lying there listening to him breathe through the door. The small, even breath of a child who has solved the problem the only way that made sense to him. She is in there and I am out here and this is close enough, this is as close as I can get, and I will be here when she opens the door. She did not tell Charles this. She didn't need to. The hand on hers was still there. They talked more slowly, the pauses getting longer and more comfortable about his own treatment. He'd been further along, further out, but neither of them pretended that shared experience was the same as identical experience. He didn't offer her that particular false comfort. He didn't say I know exactly how you feel because he was, at his core, too honest for it. What he said was, the hardest part, for me, was not the treatment. It was the waiting between knowing and not knowing. The waiting is the thing that stretches you. She looked at him. How did you? I didn't manage it well, he said simply. I want to be clear about that. I'm not offering it as advice. I'm offering it as, he paused. Searching. Companionship, I suppose. Companionship. The word sat in the room with them like a third person. She'd been performing bravery for months. For the children, for William, for the staff, for the cameras that occasionally caught her emerging from somewhere, for the public who needed her to be alright because the alternative frightened them, and she understood that, she genuinely understood it. People attached their feelings about their own safety and continuity to figures like her, and that was real and it mattered, but it meant that bravery had become load-bearing. It was holding things up. And you can't confess exhaustion to a structural wall. Charles wasn't asking her to be brave right now. He was just sitting here. Being tired himself, maybe. Being a man in his 70s who had also sat in chairs like this one, who had also looked at the particular grey of a London January and found it doing nothing useful, who also knew the specific loneliness of being surrounded by care and still feeling the distance between what people can give you and what you actually need. Her eyes were doing the filling thing again. She didn't stop them this time. I keep thinking, she said, and stopped. He waited. He was good at waiting. A lifetime of ceremony had, paradoxically, taught him patience with silences that had no agenda. I keep thinking about what I'm missing, she said. Not the big things. I know the big things will be there. I know she stopped again. Restarted. It's the small things. George's match on Saturday. Charlotte's cards that she's making right now, probably, at home, and I'm not there to see her make them. Louis in the hallway. Her voice was doing the careful thing. She let it. All the ordinary days. I keep counting up the ordinary days I'm missing and I can't stop. Charles was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. Just that. Yes. Like she'd named something true and he was confirming it, not solving it, not reframing it, not offering her the long view or the perspective whether this too shall pass that well-meaning people had been offering her since December. Just, yes. That is real. That is the thing. Her shoulders came down. She hadn't known they'd been up. William came back. He came through the door and stopped, one hand still on the frame, reading the room the way he'd learned to read rooms from birth, faster than most people can blink, and something in his expression shifted. Not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. He looked at his father. His father looked back. Something passed between them, a whole compressed conversation that had no words and needed none, the kind of communication that accrues between people who have circled each other through decades of difficult rooms. William crossed to Catherine. Sat on the arm of her chair. His hand found her shoulder. Sorry, he said. The call ran. It's all right, she said. She meant it this time. The three of them sat together in the room that smelled like antiseptic and forced calm, and London continued to go about its business outside the window, grey and unhurried, and the empty pigeon ledge caught the last of the afternoon light and held it briefly before the clouds moved through. No one said anything important for a few minutes. That was, Catherine thought, the most important thing of all. He left the way he'd come in. Quietly. No announcement. No ceremony at the door. He stood, and buttoned the coat he'd never taken off, and bent and kissed her cheek, the papery warmth of it, the particular deliberateness, and then he straightened and looked at William and said something low that she didn't catch, and William nodded, and then Charles was gone. The room was different after. Not smaller, not larger, different. Like a pressure had equalized. Like something that had been held taut had simply released, and the air had rearranged itself around the new shape of things. Catherine sat with her hands in her lap for a moment. Then, she picked up the cold tea, drank what was left, set the cup down, and said, "I'd like to go home tomorrow." William looked at her. "I know what the schedule says," she said. "I'm not asking to leave treatment. I'm asking to go home tomorrow and come back Thursday." He held her gaze for a moment, that steady, measured look that she'd watched him develop over years, the one that meant he was calculating how worried to be versus how much her need to have agency over her own body outweighed his worry, and then, he said, "I'll talk to the team." "I want to see Louis in the hallway," she said. A pause. "He's been doing that?" William said. "Every night." William looked at the window. Looked back. His jaw did the setting thing. This time it meant something different, not suppression but the particular effort of a man trying not to be visibly undone in a functional chair in a hospital room. "I'll talk to the team," he said again, softer. The team agreed to Thursday. She went home on Wednesday. William had negotiated it. She didn't ask how. She had a feeling it had involved him being very polite and very immovable, which was a specific combination he had gotten extremely good at, and she was grateful for it in the same way she was grateful for the Thames, just there, holding, not needing to be thanked. She heard the house before she was inside it. Charlotte's voice, somewhere upper floor, engaged in what sounded like a formal negotiation with someone, possibly a stuffed animal, possibly George. The register was the same. A clatter from the kitchen. The particular silence of a house that is full of people who have been told to keep it down and are failing. The door opened before she reached it. Louis. He stood on the threshold in his socks, one of which had a hole in the toe that she'd been meaning to fix since October, and he looked at her with the frank, uncomplicated assessment of a 5-year-old taking inventory of a situation, and then, he said, with absolute authority, "You're back." "I'm back," she said. He considered this. "For good?" "For now," she said. He seemed to decide this was adequate. He stepped aside to let her in, then immediately attached himself to her left leg with both arms and stayed there as she walked, so that her first several steps inside her own home were taken with a 5-year-old barnacle to her calf, his face pressed against her hip, saying nothing at all. She didn't move him. She put her hand on the top of his head, the particular warmth of a child's head, the slight resistance of all that hair, and walked into her house. Charlotte came downstairs at speed. The card she presented had been made, clearly, in the last hour. The glitter was still damp in places, and one corner had stuck to her jumper and then transferred, so she had a sequin on her cheek that she appeared to be unaware of. The card said "Welcome home, Mom," and had a drawing of what was either a garden or an explosion, and, across the bottom, in slightly smaller letters, the additional communication piece. "I made your bed." "You made my bed?" Catherine said. "I put flowers on it," Charlotte said. "From the garden." "Well. From the planter. They were the good ones." Catherine looked at her daughter, at the glitter and the sequin and the absolute self-possessed pride of a girl who had cut flowers from a planter and put them on a bed and was presenting this information like an invoice, and felt something in her chest that was too full to name, so she didn't. She held out her arms instead. Charlotte walked into them. George found her in the kitchen 20 minutes later. He was not a boy who performed feelings. He held them internally, turned them over, said nothing for days and then said something so precise it could stop you mid-sentence. He came in, made himself a glass of water at the tap, drank half, put it down, and then, studying the middle distance somewhere past her left shoulder, said, "Are you still going to be better by Saturday?" Saturday. The football match. The question from 3 weeks ago that had come out of him like an arrow without malice. She looked at him. 11 years old. Her oldest. Her boy who had been born into the most observed life in the country and was navigating it with a grace she found regularly breathtaking and regularly heartbreaking. "I don't know," she said. He looked at her then. Actually looked at her. "But, I want to be," she said. "I am trying to be. And, if I'm not, I'll watch it on the video and you'll tell me every goal." He held her gaze for a moment. He was deciding something. "Okay," he said. He picked up his water and walked out. That was it. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. She made it to Saturday. She sat on the sidelines in the cold with her coat and her scarf and a travel cup of tea that was actually hot this time, and the pitch smelled like wet grass and mud and the particular ozone of winter sport, and George was number 7, and he didn't score but he assisted on the second goal, and she made a noise that embarrassed William, who was standing next to her, who was smiling. She didn't care. She was here. That was the whole point. She was here, on the cold grass, in the wet wind, making embarrassing noises, here, present, warm-teed and alive and watching her son pass a football across a muddy pitch on a gray Saturday morning, and the gray of it, the extraordinary ordinary gray of it, was the most beautiful thing she had seen in months. That evening, after the children were in bed, Lewis, notably, in his own room, his pillow back where it belonged, apparently satisfied that the situation had resolved, she sat with William on the sofa in the place they always sat, the place worn to the shape of them both, and she thought about Charles's hand on hers in that functional chair. Companionship. She leaned into William's shoulder. He put his arm around her. Outside, London was doing its January thing, indifferent and ancient and faintly beautiful, and the stars weren't visible because they never were in this city, all that light, all that accumulated human noise pushed upward, but they were there. She knew they were there. Later, getting ready for bed, she found Charlotte's card on the pillow. Next to it, 3 stems from the garden planter, long since wilted, tied with a piece of purple ribbon that had come off something else, some birthday, some celebration, she didn't know which. She picked them up. Held them. Put them in the glass of water on the nightstand anyway. The ordinary days, I keep counting up the ordinary days I'm missing. She stopped missing them. She went and got them.